Hey, history buffs! Imagine shivering in a tiny medieval hut where the fire barely lifts the temperature above freezing. Tonight's video uncovers how peasants fought winter, stacking grimy wool tunics, warming straw beds with hot stones, and huddling together with livestock for precious body heat. Their ingenuity and community spirit kept villages alive through brutal nights, and their lessons still inspire us today. If you love exploring the gritty side of the past, smash that like button, hit subscribe, and ring the bell for more. Drop a comment sharing which survival hack surprised you most, and let's discuss medieval resilience. Step with me beyond the smoky threshold we glimpsed in the introduction, and let your eyes adjust to the gloom. Tonight is a late January evening in 1324, a moment when twilight arrives like a closing fist, and every breath seems to crystallize. The cottage into which we enter is no grand hall, but a peasant's timber-framed cell, its warped oak planks chinked with mud and cow hair. A layer of hoarfrost has crept across the iron latch, reminding the occupant's husband, wife, 3 children, and a cranky goat that the world outside still hovers below freezing. The interior air is scarcely warmer. A lonely ember glows upon the hearth and pulses with the heartbeat of the household. Should it die, the night will enter unchecked. Drafts slither through gaps in the wattle and daub walls, nibbling at ankles, and extinguishing candles so quickly that grease must be rationed like gold. Water left in a wooden bowl has skinned over with ice so thin you could write your name upon it. The roof overhead, a shag of rye thatch harvested last August, is scarcely thicker than a blanket and already peppered with holes from last week's windstorm. In daylight, slender threads of sun pierce those holes like godly needles. At night, they serve as invisible chimneys, drawing precious warmth upward and out. Parents whisper prayers to St. Sebaldus against frostbite, but they also trust to their own ingenuity. Point 1 of our exploration, then, is immersion. We must understand the enemy, the relentless cold, and the fragile barricades a medieval peasant could erect against it. Before we examine their tools, feel the sting of the air, the cracked skin on knuckles, and the dull ache settling in the bones. This is not romantic pastoral life. It is survival purchased one shiver at a time. The building itself measures no more than 12 feet by 18, yet it functions as kitchen workshop, storeroom, bedroom, and stable. At its literal and symbolic center sprawls the hearth, a shallow fire pit, lined with river stones, prized for their ability to hoard heat. Above it, a simple trammel hook suspends the blackened cookpot. Beneath it, ashes mound like gray snowdrifts, testament to fires that never quite conquer the chill. There is no built chimney. Instead, smoke meanders through lattice rafters and seeps out wherever it can after painting every beam with a glossy tar that helps waterproof the roof. Light leaks from the same cracks that siphon heat, so the family's eyes have adapted to permanent twilight. Against the north wall, a deliberate choice, because prevailing winds come from the south, stands the box bed. It is nothing more ornate than a wooden frame stuffed with rye straw, but through years of compression, the straw has matted into something like a mattress. Mother has laid several coarse linen sheets upon it, worn so thin they resemble gauze, yet softer than anything else the family owns. Under the bed lives the house piglet, rooting among turnip peels and radiating just enough warmth to prevent the straw from glazing with frost. Every object is positioned with reason. The grain chest near the west wall remains cool and dry. The spinning wheel claims the southeast corner, where the low winter sun occasionally lingers. Hooks on the rafters cradle sides of bacon, their fat solidified like candle wax. Tools lean in a shadowy row by the door, ready to defend against wolves, or worse, the cold stealing wind. Yet 4 walls and a roof alone cannot outwit winter, so the family wears its first line of defense. The wardrobe starts with a linen chemise, undyed scratchy, but a marvel at wicking away sweat that would freeze. Over that go 2 layers of wool, an undershirt lightly felted, then a heavier tunic whose seams bulge with hastily inserted patches. Scarcity of soap renders the fabric stiff with lanolin and kitchen grease, but that grime forms an accidental wind-proof membrane. A leather belt cinches the ensemble, trapping a bubble of warmer air close to the body. Legs hide within chausse's woolen hose laced to a drawstring waistband, and feet disappear into ankle boots stuffed with dried moss that serves as makeshift felt. A hooded cowl crowns the affair, its liripipe dangling like a tail the children swing for fun. Laundering in winter is a luxury no peasant can afford. Garments washed in icy water might freeze solid before drying, so clothing is refreshed instead by smoke snow rubbing or simple resignation. At night, these layers become bedding. By day, they are armor. For additional heat, the family practices the art of banking the fire. Before retiring, father arranges larger logs around a core of embers and buries the assembly under a blanket of ash. Deprived of oxygen, the embers smolder slowly, preserving a kernel of flame until dawn. Come morning, a single puff of breath and handful of kindling awaken the slumbering heart of the house, saving precious tinder sticks for nights yet to come. Beside the hearth sits a hay box, a stout wooden chest packed with dry straw. After supper, mother nestles the iron cookpot inside. Trapped heat continues to simmer porridge without wasting extra fuel, transforming straw into a medieval slow cooker. Earlier in the afternoon, the older children gathered river stones selected for smoothness so they would not crack when heated. They arranged the stones in a circle at the edge of the hearth until they glowed dull red, then scooped them into an ashwood bucket with iron tongs. Wrapped in scraps of last year's linen, the stones became rustic hot water bottles slipped between sheets just before bedtime. The linen scorched and smoked, perfuming the whole cottage with a scent somewhere between campfire and wet sheep. But the radiant heat it offered could spell the difference between sleep and shivering insomnia. All the while, survival choreographs itself as communal ballet. Once darkness settles, bodies arrange into the pattern villagers cheekily dub the lasagna. The youngest child curls against mother's stomach. Father's back shields them both from drafts creeping through the door planks. The grandmother claims the warm spot nearest the embers, her arthritic fingers finally loosening under the heat. Across her spine sprawls the family dog, a shaggy beast whose panting adds another thread to the tapestry of shared warmth. In the outer ring lie the teenagers, proud and stubborn, daring the cold to do its worst. Sleep itself becomes a watch duty every 3 hours. Someone rises, shakes the snow off a roof beam if necessary, and checks that the fire still breathes. Neighbors operate on similar shifts, and should one hut's ember expire, a child may sprint barefoot through snow to beg a glowing coal wrapped in cabbage leaf from next door. Such exchanges are not charity, but an unwritten insurance policy. Next week, the roles may reverse. When a storm howls, several families herd their livestock into a single byre and spread straw thick enough to muffle hooves. Heat pooling from dozens of living bodies can lift the interior temperature by 10 degrees salvation, measured in increments of breath. Songs, prayers, and ribald jokes ripple through the dark, at each word. A visible puff that disappears into the rafters, but their true destination is morale. One recorded episode during the Great Famine Winter of 1316 illustrates how these strategies met extremity head-on. In Lower Bower Parish, the Miller household Ulrich Isabel children, Agnes Tom, and Little Rose, plus Ulrich's widowed sister Alice, began January with half a sack of barley 3 onions and a dwindling stack of peat. On 12th night, they slaughtered their final piglet, rendering every ounce of fat for lamp oil and broth. Each evening thereafter, Isabel stirred a porridge so thin it mirrored moonlight, yet she whispered gratitude that her children still had spoons to tap against wooden bowls. Ulrich spent days weaving wattles for a wealthier neighbor in exchange for rotten straw, which he spread beneath the bed to trap any warmth the earth might give up. The children scavenged rabbit droppings for fuel, their tiny hands red and cracked, but determined. Each dawn began with a ritual. Alice lifted a coal from the hearth with blacksmith tongs and carried it across the threshold to the neighbor whose fire had died. In return, she received a cup of whey that kept Rose's ribs from showing. Thus the village circulated life in small wooden ladles, heat food warmth. Hope until lambing season finally broke the famine's grip. When spring arrived, parish records noted only 2 deaths in Lower Bower, astoundingly low compared with nearby hamlets. Survivors credited neither luck nor divine miracle, but the deliberate web of practices we have just traced. Layered garments, banked embers, haybox stewing, and the living quilt of bodies on straw. Their story embodies the humble heroism history often overlooks. Remember this tale as we move into point 2, where we will explore the resourcefulness that turned ordinary farm tools into instruments of thermal engineering. But for now, let the Miller cottage fade from view, its ember still glowing like a stubborn star against the winter's indigo sky. Picking up the story where we left the Miller cottage glowing like a stubborn coal against the winter void, point 2 invites us back outside to survey the broader toolkit of survival, an inventory of farm implements and materials that medieval peasants reinvented as engines of warmth. While point 1 showed how layered wool and communal slumber held the chill at bay indoors, this chapter follows the clever choreography of labor that began at dawn long before another ember was coaxed to life to capture, store, and recycle every stray calorie of heat the earth could offer. Our first stop is the barn half buried in snow and vibrating with purpose. Ulrich the miller has swapped his night tunic for a quilted gambeson and now wields his flail not for threshing barley, but for beating straw, a practice that explodes stalks into soft chaff. Coarse straw suits cattle, yet it scrapes human skin raw. By reducing it to fluff, Ulrich makes a loftier filler for mattresses and cloak linings, trapping more still air and therefore more warmth. He pours the chaff into sacks stitched from last year's flour bags, sews them shut with bone needles, and stacks them by the hearth, a silent reserve against the next polar night. Out in the yard, Agnes and Tom hover over a 3-legged pot set on a fist-sized ember. They dip short hemp cords into melted pine resin to fashion tar cords. Once cooled, these dark coils cradle a spark for hours, acting as medieval Zippo lighters during forest foraging. Pine pitch, usually saved for sealing wine barrels here, becomes portable heat insurance. Each cord is brushed with ash so it won't stick to mittened hands, then coiled in a lindenwood box lined with lambskin for the next expedition. Meanwhile, Isabel readies the humblest of tools, the wooden spade. In summer, it digs irrigation ditches, but in winter, it slices peat blocks from the marsh commons. Peat is dense and smoky fuel the nobility scorn, but its slow smolder produces radiant warmth, perfect for drying clothes indoors or proofing bread dough. Isabel and her sister Alice heave the blocks onto a sled made from a broken door and 2 greased ash poles. Without iron runners, the sled never sparks against hidden rocks and glides silently home. Each peat brick is stacked to form a miniature wall near the hearth, absorbing heat by day and exhaling it long after embers die. Closer to the cottage wall stands another repurposed item, the willow hurdle. In sheep season, these lattice panels corral flocks. Now they stand in a semicircle facing the prevailing southerlies, diverting icy air over the roofline and shrinking infiltration through the thatch. Behind the improvised shield chores feel several degrees warmer, and the hut's meager fire must labor less fiercely. When the wind shifts, the family simply pivots the panels on wooden pegs driven into the frozen ground farm fencing turned climate control. Inside, ingenuity grows even more intimate. Beside the hay box slow cooker from Point 1, a clay bread oven squats against the north wall. It is no grand masonry dome, merely a squat bell of burned clay open toward the hearth. After the day's loaves finish baking, Ulrich plugs the mouth with a slate tile scavenged from the Lord's quarry. All evening, the oven radiates soft heat through its thick walls, turning the sleeping area into what architects now call a thermal battery. Every crumb of fuel thus serves double duty, first feeding the family, then lulling them to sleep in relative comfort. Roof care, too, becomes a midwinter occupation, because a leaky thatch means melted snow trickling onto bedding and midnight misery. Father climbs a ladder fashioned from ash poles and flax rope, armed with the same pitchfork that flipped hay in July. Using its bent tines, he teases loose rye stems back into alignment, then packs a fresh plug of water reed cut from frozen marsh ponds at dawn. Each tuft is tamped with a wooden thumbler. A mallet he whittled from an oak root felled by the autumn storm. While he works, Mother tosses handfuls of sieved ash across the roof. The ash settles into crevices, repelling insects come spring and adding a mineral crust that sheds rain like slate. By sunset, the roof is again a patchwork quilt, its repaired ridges ready to shrug off the next blizzard. Lighting pitches in, too. Tallow candles are trimmed to half-inch wicks so they gutter less. But the true marvel is the rushlight strips of dried rush dipped in bacon grease wedged into an iron clamp. The flame illuminates little more than a prayer book, yet molten fat drips onto a slate shard. Come morning, the hardened beads are scraped up and remelted an endless lipid loop that provides both illumination and a few extra calories of radiant heat. 30 paces away, a communal cider shed offers a biothermal boon. Apples harvested at Michaelmas have long since fermented in oak tuns, producing carbon dioxide and gentle warmth. Villagers stack hay bales around the barrels, creating what we'd call a bioreactor. The hay insulates the fermentation heat, which in turn dries the hay and prevents mold, allowing it to serve next as animal bedding. One ecosystem powers another, each link forged by yeast patience and the promise of sweet cider at Lent's end. Human waste joins the orchestra. Behind the cottage, a midden of straw and manure steams beneath snow. By tunneling air shafts with sharpened sticks, peasants control aerobic decomposition, keeping temperatures high enough to discourage rats, yet low enough to avoid spontaneous fire. In January, they press chicken coops against that radiator, and hens reward them with eggs weeks earlier than neighboring villages. Even excrement properly shepherded returns the favor as breakfast protein and hand-warming steam. Perhaps the most elegant adaptation is a snow lens, a trick preserved in regional folklore. It begins with a wooden trough once used for brining pork. Peasants pack it with snow, then bury 3 hot river stones inside. As the stones melt, a tunnel water drains through a reed spile into a clay jug below. The snow refreezes around the void, but not before releasing heat that raises the trough interior to just above freezing enough to keep turnips crisp and to thaw beeswax for candle making. When the stones cool, they are returned to the hearth to start the cycle again. All these devices share a philosophy: nothing exists for a single season. The iron cauldron that boiled linen in spring renders lard in autumn and humidifies air in winter. The billhook that trimmed hazel in May carves those rods into wattle panels slid between rafters as pop-up insulation by December. Waste is sin. Utility is salvation. Engineering here is driven by scarcity, not surplus. Where a modern household buys specialized appliances, a medieval family layers ingenuity onto whatever lies at hand until each object wears 3 masks: tool, shield, and stove, linking back to Point 1's ember that glowed like a private star. Point 2 reveals its constellation flails, smashing straw into thermal stuffing. Peat sleds, hauling buried warmth hurdles, bending wind ovens, moonlighting as heaters. Yeast vats doubling as radiators, middens breathing steam, and small hands shaping snow into storehouses. The Miller family, and thousands like them, orchestrate a landscape-wide furnace without blueprints, guided only by habit and keen experimentation. They might lack Latin treatises, yet their barnyard laboratory yields results that keep flesh from freezing and futures from fading. As the calendar limps toward Candlemas, nights shorten by heartbeats, and each extra sliver of daylight recalibrates the village's heat arithmetic. Windbreak hurdles are dismantled to pen newborn lambs whose lanolin-rich fleeces will spin into next winter's capes. Peat sleds are scrubbed and oiled, ready to haul seedlings when thaw softens the earth. Nothing retires. Everything rotates purpose, becoming a perpetual motion machine powered by necessity and know-how. So when we admire a medieval hamlet frozen in an illuminated manuscript, let us not mistake stillness for stasis. Beneath that roof, livers' fermentation vats, compost heaps, and rushlights hum with exchanges of energy that would make a passive house architect nod in respect. Peasant resourcefulness stitched technology and ritual until the boundary vanished. Prayer became. Planning toil became thermal strategy, and survival became its own silent art. Point 2, therefore, hands the torch quite literally to Point 3, where we will watch these same villagers greet early spring with rites that fuse gratitude and pragmatic anticipation, leveraging the warmth they banked all winter to ignite the agricultural cycle anew. For now, picture a countryside gently exhaling through peat fires and steaming midden piles, a world kept alive by 1,000 small, smart flames rather than one roaring inferno. The peat-scented vapors from the Miller hearth have hardly faded yet. The village of Lower Bower is already bracing for its next ordeal spring sowing. Point 2 showed how every barn tool became an engine of warmth. Point 3 follows that warmth as it resurfaces outdoors, stirring soil and spirit alive again. It is February 2nd, Candlemas. Straw shutters creak open on a dawn thin as parchment, and breath dissolves quickly in the cool air. Snow clings in ragged sheets, but Tom Miller 14 eager tests a furrow marked last October. His tarred wooden spade slips through loam loosened by the steaming midden he and Agnes tended all winter. Each lifted clod exhales an earthy musk. They fold that fertility straight into the earth, banking it the way their parents banked embers on January nights. Livestock feel the pivot, too. The goat that slept by the hearth is turfed outside where she balances on a stump to nibble green lichen. Ewes heavy with lambs stamp in pens ringed by willow hurdles last month's windbreaks quickly repurposed. Every bleat and shuffle warms buckets enough to keep them from icing over a living radiator no forge could match. Mid-morning bells summon the blessing of the candles. Father Osgar lifts a taper of mixed beeswax and bacon fat. Each household lights a smaller wick, pockets it in a horn holder, and heads home. The spark is both sacrament and insurance, for no peasant trusts March weather. Outside, Ulrich yokes his oxen for the plow blessing. Holy water meets axle grease on the share, and the first furrow slices clean, dark soil, curling up like ribbon worms twisting in surprise. Cheers echo across the thaw. Inside, Isabel converts the clay oven overnight radiator of point 2 into a seed nursery. Dishes of barley soaked in weak ale rest on wooden racks inside the gentle heat. Soon, rootlets will appear, turning winter's final malt into spring pig feed and thickening potages. Children forage nettle tips and sorrel for the season's first vitamins, simmering them over tar cords they dipped back in January. At dusk, the plow penny tradition begins. Each family tosses a coin into a wooden bowl atop the village plow. Tonight it buys ale and bread. Tomorrow it buys ox shoes and harness repairs. Winter's ethic of mutual rescue ripens into an economy of shared labor, sealing alliances before the first seed is sown. The days that follow unfold like a tapestry. Before sunrise, a haze of breath hovers above every rooftop, a last souvenir of winter, but villagers are already in motion. Ulrich joins a rotating plow gang, 4 men, 8 oxen, 1 day per acre. Shared labor keeps the open field system synchronized, ensuring no strip falls behind the sowing calendar. At noon, the gang breaks for pottage thickened with malt sprouts, warmth passed from stomach to sinew. Meanwhile, Isabel and Alice convene the Women's Seed Guild beneath budding hawthorn. Each brings packets of skirret parsnip and woad bartering varieties as merchants swap silk. Guild rules require every member to test germinate her stock between damp cloth squares laid on the warm oven lid. Poor performers feed the hens. Strong sprouters are recorded on a wax tablet that Agnes keeps with a scholar's pride. The exchange binds kinship and teaches moon phase planting to the next generation. Children's laughter returns after Vespers when the first lamb drops in the byre. Tom assists the birth, guided by the midwife's herbal infusions of shepherd's purse and coltsfoot. The lamb's navel is dipped in warmed wine, stored in amphorae, half buried in the midden earth-powered refrigeration that proves winter ingenuity still pays dividends. In quieter hours, Tom checks the apiary. Beehives wrapped in bracken through December now shed their coats. Early flights mean healthy queens, and wax enough for next winter's candles, another line in the thermal ledger. Science meets superstition at the brewhouse, where a green ale from surplus malt and nettle shoots ferments until its bubbles match a paternoster rhythm. Horn mugs of the sharp brew carry alcoholic warmth into meadow twilight. Agnes scavenges sun-warmed quartz from an old Roman road and lines the cottage garden path. The stones drink daylight and release it after sunset, creating miniature heat islands where she tucks secret basil seedlings luxuries the manor's cook covets. Microclimates become stealth technology unseen yet potent. Rogation. Monday, late April, crowns the effort. Processions snake through kale patches and over fresh drainage ditches. Villagers chant the litany of the saints, while children whip the air with willow switches, beating the bounds into collective memory. The circuit ends at a stone cross where last year's grievances are buried, closing old accounts so crops may rise unburdened. Back at the Miller cottage, supper is a revelation smoked eel nettle pudding and the first crust of fresh rye bread. The clay oven still bleeds warmth, so the family lingers trading plans under a halo of moths. Outside, flat stones, once bed warmers, now radiate captured sunshine. Even nighttime feels collaborative. Ulrich steps onto the threshold, holding the horn-cased Candlemas taper and whistles. 3 distant cottages answer with pinpricks of flame, signaling that all scheduled fields are plowed. Tomorrow work pivots to harrowing and seed-stamping wordless coordination, powered by sightlines and trust. Sleep arrives without frantic layering of blankets. A single wool coverlet aired over rosemary suffices. Winter hasn't vanished. It has been folded into spring labor so thoroughly that its remnants serve new needs: ash for soil straw, for pen's wisdom, for another generation. Music carries extra warmth. Tom practices plainsong for Whit Sunday. Notes drift over ridges like swallows. Cultural energy, no less than thermal, is stored and shared. In academic ledgers, centuries later, these customs appear quaint. Yet in 1324, they are dynamic engineering solutions, balancing heat stamina and ecology with elegance any modern permaculturist might admire. Ritual merges with technology. Smoke vigils act like frost fans. Processions double as land surveys. Candle blessings form a distributed ignition grid. Knowledge isn't written. It is enacted, sung, sown. By mid-April, icicles vanish the mill wheel splashes, and flour dust glitters like powdered gold. Rushlights hang unused. The haybox slow cooker now stews greens for piglets. Straw insulation intact. Riverstones rest under the south window, soaking sun for evening release. Old habits adapt. None disappear. When frogs finally trill, the land is quilted in greens, pale rye, violet peas, feathery carrots. The Miller door stays open longer, letting stored heat escape at a measured pace, proof that scarcity is turning into cautious surplus. Picture the Miller family at the edge of their freshly sown barley faces, lifted toward a sun still tentative, yet irresistible. They have transmuted every ember tool and winter habit into momentum for the growing season. In point 4, we will now boldly ride that momentum into high summer when medieval peasants face the different but no less perilous challenge of managing abundance. From those fire-banked winter nights to the candle-lit spring furrows, our journey has shown how medieval peasants turned scarcity into ingenious resilience, storing warmth, hope, and community in every tool and ritual. Their story reminds us that innovation thrives where cooperation and necessity meet lessons as relevant today as ever. If this tale of clever survival sparked your imagination, please tap like, subscribe, and ring the bell so you never miss a chapter. Then scroll down and tell us which medieval hack or modern equivalent you'd try first, and why your insights keep the conversation as lively as a hearthside flame. Thank you.